On Christmas Eve in the frozen Montana plains, a lonely cowboy named Luke discovers a starving horse collapsed in the snow. Haunted by the ghosts of a family he lost years ago, Luke kneels beside the trembling animal and whispers words he desperately needs to hear himself. You shouldn't be alone on Christmas. What starts as one act of mercy becomes a winter of healing, as man and horse save each other from the cold that lives inside and out. Through blizzards and silence, they build something neither thought possible again: hope. But when spring melts the snow, it also uncovers the past Luke tried to bury. A shadow returns, bringing with it a choice that will decide whether the fragile peace they've built can survive. Can a broken man find redemption through the creature he saved, or will his past destroy them both? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch sat 15 miles from anywhere that mattered, tucked into a valley where the wind carved stories into the snowdrifts and the silence pressed against a man's chest like a physical weight. Luke Thorne had chosen this isolation deliberately, the way a wounded animal seeks a dark corner to either heal or die. For 5 years, he'd walked the same paths, tended the same fences, and watched the seasons turn with the detached interest of a man who no longer believed time held any promise. He woke before dawn most mornings, not from habit, but from the inability to sleep past the hour when memories grew sharpest. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, of dust settled on surfaces no one bothered to clean properly. A man living alone develops routines that serve function over comfort. Oatmeal in the same blue bowl, coffee black and bitter. Boots pulled on while standing, balanced against the doorframe Sarah had once painted yellow because she said the place needed sunshine even in winter. That paint had faded to something between cream and grey now, like everything else. Luke ran a small operation, just enough cattle to justify the land, a few chickens that survived more from stubbornness than his care. He fixed what broke, patched what tore, and let everything else slide toward entropy. The barn needed new boards on the north side. The truck's check engine light had been on since spring. None of it seemed urgent when you were just marking time until your own engine finally gave out. The nearest town, Ironwood, held maybe 300 souls on a generous count. Luke drove in once a month for supplies, speaking only as many words as necessary to complete transactions. The folks there had learned to leave him be. In the beginning, they'd tried. Casseroles appeared on his porch. Invitations to church suppers went unanswered. Tom Garrett, who ran the feed store and had known Luke before, still checked on him with the persistence of someone who remembered who Luke used to be. Before the accident, before the black ice and the semi-truck and the kind of silence that follows a phone call at 2 in the morning, Sarah had been driving home from her sister's place in Billings. Emma, 7 years old, asleep in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit and dreams of the Christmas morning, just days away. The highway patrol officer who came to Luke's door had been young, probably on his first death notification, and the words had come out rehearsed and hollow. "I'm sorry for your loss," as if loss was something you misplaced, like keys or a wallet, instead of the complete dismantling of every reason you had for drawing breath. Luke kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them. Sarah's book on the nightstand, reading glasses folded on top. Emma's stuffed animals arranged on her bed in the specific order she required. He couldn't enter those spaces, but he couldn't change them either. They existed like museum exhibits to a life that felt increasingly like something he'd imagined rather than lived. The wedding ring hung on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. He'd taken it off his finger after the funeral, unable to wear the symbol of a marriage that existed now only in memory, but equally unable to put it away in a drawer. So it rested against his chest, a small circle of gold that grew warm from his body heat. Sometimes he'd touch it through the fabric, a gesture so unconscious he didn't realize he was doing it until his fingers found the shape. Tom showed up on the 1st of every month like clockwork, his old truck rattling up the drive with the bed full of feed and salt blocks and whatever else Luke had called in. Tom never asked how Luke was doing, Instead, he'd comment on the weather, mention news from town, and work around to topics carefully, watching for the moment Luke's face would close off entirely. "Storm coming," Tom had said last week, squinting at the horizon where clouds gathered like a bruise. "Big one, according to the weather service." "You got enough wood stacked?" Luke had nodded, already calculating how many days he could go without leaving the property. Storms meant isolation, and isolation meant safety from the well-meaning concerns of people who thought 5 years should be enough time to move on, as if grief operated on a schedule. He'd loved being a horseman once. The ranch had boarded 3 beautiful quarter horses before, animals Sarah had chosen and Emma had named with the creativity of a child who believed horses should be called things like Butterscotch and Thunder and Princess Sparkle. After the accident, Luke had sold them to a family 2 counties over, unable to bear the sight of Emma's empty saddle in the tack room or the way the horses would wait at the fence line at feeding time, patient and trusting in a way that made his chest ache. Now the barn stood mostly empty, except for his old gelding, Rusty, who'd earned retirement and spent his days dozing in the corner stall. Luke kept up the maintenance out of muscle memory, but the building felt too large, too full of echoes from when it had housed life and purpose. Christmas Eve arrived with the particular cruelty reserved for holidays that once meant something. Luke woke to frost patterns on the windows that looked like the drawings Emma used to make, all swirls and magic rendered in ice. He lay still for a moment, listening to the wind test the corners of the cabin, then rose and went through his morning routine with mechanical precision. The coffee tasted like ash. Everything did on this day. In town, Ironwood would be stringing lights and setting up the nativity scene in the square. The diner would serve hot chocolate with candy canes, and children would press their faces against the window of Miller's General Store, counting the hours until morning. Sarah had loved Christmas with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that joy required effort and attention. She decorated every surface, baked cookies that filled the house with cinnamon and sugar, played carols on the old record player until Luke knew every word by heart. He'd turned the record player to face the wall 3 years ago. Couldn't bear to look at it. The photographs throughout the cabin had also been turned over or put face down in drawers. Not thrown away, never that, but hidden, because seeing Sarah's smile or Emma's gap-toothed grin felt like swallowing broken glass. The only picture that remained upright sat on the mantel, a formal wedding photo where neither of them was smiling quite naturally, stiff in their formal clothes. He could look at that one because those people seemed like strangers, young and naive enough to believe happiness was something you could count on. Emma's room remained exactly as she'd left it. The bed made with the purple comforter she'd picked out herself. Stuffed animals lined up with careful precision. A half-finished drawing on her desk showed a horse with wings, because at 7, Emma had believed magic was just a matter of wishing hard enough. Luke had stood in the doorway once a year on her birthday, never crossing the threshold, just looking at the space that should have held a growing girl, and instead held only absence. He made himself eat toast he didn't taste, then pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. The thermometer outside read 12 degrees, and the clouds hung low and grey, pregnant with snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. Tom had been right about the storm. Luke could feel it in his joints, in the way the air sat too still, waiting. The sensible thing would be to stay close to the cabin, make sure the generator was fueled and the wood stacked near the door. But sense had little to do with decisions made on Christmas Eve when your family was buried in the cemetery behind the Methodist church and you were still, inexplicably, breathing. Luke needed to move, to walk, to exhaust himself enough that maybe, just maybe, he could sleep without dreams. He'd checked the north fence line. 3 miles out, 3 miles back. Hard work in deep snow, the kind that left a man too tired to think. Luke saddled Rusty, who huffed with the indignation of a horse who'd expected a quiet day in his warm stall. "I know, old man," Luke said, patting the gelding's neck. "But I need the company, even if you're too smart to need mine." They set out across the valley floor, the snow crunching under Rusty's hooves with a sound like breaking bones. The landscape stretched white in all directions, interrupted only by the dark lines of fence posts and the occasional juniper twisted by decades of wind. Beautiful in its way, harsh and honest. The kind of country that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Luke had grown up in this valley. Fourth generation on land, his great-grandfather had homesteaded. He knew every rise and hollow, every place where water collected in spring, and every sheltered spot where cattle gathered in winter storms. This knowledge sat in his bones, deeper than conscious thought. He'd planned to teach it all to Emma, to pass down the accumulated wisdom of men who'd learned to read weather in the sky and find water by the way grass grew. That future had died with her. The fence line showed signs of the season. Posts leaned at angles, wire sagged under the weight of ice. Luke dismounted periodically to make notes of repairs needed, though he knew he probably wouldn't get to them until spring. If then, the work felt increasingly pointless, like rearranging furniture in a house you planned to abandon. 3 miles out, where the fence turned west along the ridgeline, Luke heard something that didn't belong. A sound so faint he almost missed it under the wind's constant conversation. He reined Rusty to a stop and listened, head tilted, the way his grandfather had taught him to listen to country that was trying to tell you something. There, again, a cry, weak and desperate. An animal in distress. Luke's first instinct was to ignore it. Nature was full of suffering, and trying to fix every injured creature was a fool's errand. But the sound came again, and this time he heard something in it that pulled at the part of himself he'd thought was completely dead, not just pain but pleading. A call for help from something that understood help might exist. He turned Rusty toward the sound, moving off the trail into deeper snow. The drifts reached the gelding's chest in places, and they moved slowly, pushing through like swimming in a frozen sea. The temperature was dropping fast now, and the first flakes began to fall, small and dry, the kind that meant serious snow was coming. The horse lay in a hollow about 50 yards from the fence line, half buried in snow that had drifted over it. At first, Luke thought it was already dead, the way it lay so still. Then it raised its head, just barely, and looked at him with eyes that held more expression than any animal's eyes should hold. It was dying. That much was clear from the way its ribs showed like barrel staves, from the frost that crusted its muzzle, from the trembling that shook its entire body. Someone had left this horse to die, either through neglect or intention, and it had crawled here to its final resting place in the snow. Luke dismounted slowly, his boots sinking deep. The horse watched him approach, but didn't have the strength to flee or fight. It was a young animal, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with a coat that might have been bay or chestnut under the ice and filth. A gelding, wearing a halter so old and weathered the leather had cracked in places. Luke knelt in the snow beside the dying horse, and for the first time in 5 years felt something crack open in his own chest. Here was suffering he could witness. Here was death he might prevent. Here was a choice that felt, in this moment, like the only choice that mattered. He reached out and laid his gloved hand on the horse's neck, feeling the flutter of pulse beneath the frozen hide. The horse's eye fixed on his, and Luke saw in it the same desperate loneliness that greeted him every morning in the mirror. "You shouldn't be alone on Christmas," Luke heard himself say. The words hung in the cold air between them, and Luke wasn't entirely sure who he'd spoken them for. The horse's breathing came in shallow gasps, each exhale a small cloud of vapor that dissipated immediately in the bitter wind. Luke ran his hands carefully over the animal's body, assessing with the practiced touch of someone who'd spent a lifetime around horses. The gelding was young, maybe 4 years old, though malnutrition made precise aging difficult. Under the ice and matted hair, Luke could feel every rib, every vertebra along the spine. The hip bones jutted sharp enough to cut, but it was the other things he found that made his jaw tighten and something hot and angry stir in his chest. Scars, old ones and newer ones, crisscrossing the horse's shoulders and flanks in patterns that spoke of systematic cruelty. The kind of marks left by wire or chain, applied with enough force to break skin. hooves worn down beyond what any natural terrain would cause, suggesting the horse had been worked hard on concrete or gravel without proper care. And when Luke gently opened the horse's mouth to check his teeth, he found tongue, scarring consistent with a bit used brutally, yanked and twisted to force compliance. Someone hadn't just neglected this animal, they'd tortured it. The halter the horse wore had rubbed raw patches on his face, the leather so old it had turned brittle. When Luke examined the brass plate riveted to the noseband, he could barely make out a brand mark beneath the grime. He'd look at it closer later, if there was a later. Right now the horse's eyes were starting to glaze, that particular dimming that meant the body was shutting down, conserving what little energy remained for the final transition. "No," Luke said, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "Not today. Not like this." The decision made itself, really. Or perhaps it had already been made the moment Luke heard that first weak cry. He stood and looked around, calculating. The horse couldn't walk. Luke couldn't carry him. Rusty could drag a load, but putting a rope around a dying animal and hauling it through the snow would likely finish what the cold had started. He'd need the truck, which meant riding back to the ranch, getting the vehicle, and hoping he could navigate it close enough through the drifts. All while the temperature dropped and the snow began falling in earnest. The horse might not survive the weight. Probably wouldn't if Luke was being realistic, but realistic had gotten him exactly nowhere for 5 years. Luke pulled off his heavy coat and laid it over the horse's trembling body. "I'm coming back," he said, meeting those dimming eyes. "You hear me? I'm coming back, so you hold on." The ride back to the ranch took forever, and no time at all. Rusty sensed Luke's urgency and pushed through the drifts with more energy than he'd shown in years. Luke's mind raced, planning. He'd need blankets, the heating lamps from the barn, water that wasn't frozen, liquid nutrition, though he'd have to mix something from what he had on hand. The veterinary supplies left over from when the ranch had regularly housed horses. Tom's number was programmed into his phone. Luke pulled it out as Rusty crested the last rise, the cabin and barn visible below. One bar of signal, but it was enough. "Luke." Tom's voice crackled with surprise. Luke hadn't initiated a call-in longer than either of them could remember. "Everything all right?" "Need supplies," Luke said, already mentally organizing. "Electrolyte powder, liquid vitamins if you got them, high-calorie feed, the paste kind for foundered horses. And blankets, as many as you can spare. What's going on?" "Found a horse, dying, going to try to save it." A pause. Then Tom's voice came back, careful. "Luke, sometimes the kindest thing is to let them go. Not this time." Luke reached the barn and swung down from Rusty's back. "Can you get those things or not?" "I can get them." "Luke, the roads are already bad and getting worse. Storm's hitting hard. I might not be able to make it out there until morning. Then I'll work with what I've got." Luke was already moving, phone tucked against his shoulder as he led Rusty into his stall. "But if you can get through, I'd be grateful." "I'll try," Tom said. "Luke, be careful." Luke ended the call and got to work. He loaded the truck bed with everything he thought he might need. Blankets, heating lamps, a tarp to create a windbreak, a shovel to clear snow, the bottle of expired antibiotic paste from the medicine cabinet, a bottle of corn syrup, and a bag of electrolyte powder he'd used to make liquid nutrition, rope and straps to secure the horse for transport. Sarah's medical journals were still in the cabin, her careful handwriting documenting treatments for everything from colic to pneumonia. She'd been studying to become a large animal veterinarian, had been 2 semesters from her degree when Emma was born, and she'd decided to pause her education. "Later," she'd said. "There's always later," but later had run out on a patch of black ice. Luke grabbed the journals, thumbing through to the sections on hypothermia and starvation recovery. Sarah's voice seemed to whisper from the pages, patient and thorough, explaining the dangers of refeeding syndrome and the careful balance required to bring a starving animal back from the edge. The drive back out to the north fence line tested every bit of Luke's knowledge of his own land. Twice he had to stop and dig the truck out of drifts. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that gathered on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. But Luke had lived in this valley his entire life, had driven these routes in every season and every weather. His hands knew which way to turn the wheel, even when his eyes couldn't see the path. When he finally reached the spot, he had a moment of panic that he'd miscalculated, that the horse had already given up and died while Luke was gone. But then he saw the small lump under his coat, saw the faint rise and fall that meant breath still moved through lungs. Luke worked quickly, clearing snow and setting up the heating lamps powered by the truck's generator. He created a sheltered space with the tarp, blocking the worst of the wind. Then came the delicate process of moving the horse onto the tarp, using straps and leverage and every bit of careful strength Luke possessed. The gelding groaned, but didn't fight. Too weak for resistance. "Easy," Luke murmured, the way he'd once talked to spooked cattle or frightened foals. "Easy now." Almost done. Getting the horse into the truck bed required a makeshift ramp and more strength than Luke thought he still possessed. His muscles screamed, his back threatened to give out, but somehow they managed it. The horse lay on his side, wrapped in blankets, with the heating lamps creating a small pocket of warmth in the frozen world. The drive back felt like threading a needle in the dark. Luke went slowly, avoiding anything that might jostle or stress his passenger. Through the rear window, he could see the horse's head, still moving, still fighting. At the ranch, Luke backed the truck right up to the barn doors. He'd prepared the largest stall, the one that used to house Princess Sparkle, Emma's favorite. Fresh straw covered the floor a foot deep, and he'd hung every heat lamp he owned from the rafters. The space glowed orange and warm, a pocket of life in the winter darkness. Moving the horse inside took the last of Luke's strength. By the time he had the gelding settled on the straw, wrapped in dry blankets, with the heat lamps positioned close, Luke's hands shook and his breath came in gasps. But the horse was inside, safe, warm. Luke knelt beside him in the straw, one hand on the horse's neck, feeling the steady beat of a heart that refused to quit. "Gabriel," Luke said, the name appearing in his mind fully formed. "The angel who brought messages of hope. I'm going to call you Gabriel." The horse's eye found his, and Luke could have sworn he saw understanding there, recognition, the beginning of trust. He set to work. Christmas morning arrived without fanfare. Just the pale grey light filtering through the barn windows, and Luke's neck protesting the angle he'd slept at. He dozed sitting up, back against the stall wall, unwilling to leave Gabriel alone through the night. The horse still breathed, and that simple fact felt like a victory. Luke stood slowly, joints cracking, and assessed his patient in the better light. Gabriel looked marginally less like a corpse than he had 12 hours ago. The heat lamps had done their work, bringing the horse's body temperature back up to something approaching normal. The trembling had mostly stopped, though Luke could see occasional shivers run through the thin frame. He mixed the electrolyte solution carefully, following the measurements Sarah had noted in her journal. The margin for error was slim. Too much too fast could overwhelm the horse's system, causing more harm than good. Luke warmed the mixture to body temperature, then knelt beside Gabriel's head. "All right, boy," he said softly. "Let's see if we can get some of this in you." Gabriel's eyes tracked the movement as Luke brought the bottle close. The horse's instinct to survive kicked in when the nipple touched his lips, and he began to suck weakly. Luke felt something tight in his chest loosen as Gabriel swallowed, then swallowed again. Not much, maybe a few ounces, but enough to matter. "Good," Luke murmured. "That's real good." He'd spent the night between brief dozing periods reading Sarah's journals, relearning knowledge he'd once known well. Sarah had possessed the kind of mind that organized information into clear, actionable steps. Her notes on treating severe malnutrition filled 3 pages, written in her precise hand, with little stars next to the most critical points. Luke followed her protocol exactly. Small amounts of liquid nutrition every 2 hours. Monitor body temperature and heart rate. Check for signs of organ failure or shock. Gentle massage to improve circulation. Keep the animal warm and quiet, reducing stress as much as possible. It gave Luke something to do, a schedule to follow, a purpose beyond simply existing from one day to the next. He found himself talking to Gabriel as he worked, The way he used to talk to Sarah when she was studying late, and he'd bring her tea, content to be in the same room while she concentrated. "Sarah would have known exactly what to do for you," Luke said, running his hands gently over Gabriel's legs, checking for swelling or breaks. "She had a way with animals, patient, never rushed. Used to tell me that healing couldn't be forced, that you had to work with the body's own rhythms." Gabriel's ear flicked toward Luke's voice, the first truly responsive gesture Luke had seen. "She'd have liked you," Luke continued, reaching for one of the healing salves Sarah had made herself, recipes she'd learned from an old horseman who'd worked their ranch when Luke was a boy. The jar's label bore her handwriting. "For cuts and abrasions," it read. "Apply twice daily." Luke carefully cleaned the worst of Gabriel's wounds, applying the salve with gentle pressure. The horse flinched occasionally, but didn't panic, as if some part of him understood that these hands meant help rather than harm. Around mid-morning, the sound of an engine struggling through snow announced Tom's arrival. Luke met him at the barn door, blocking the entrance before Tom could step inside and potentially startle Gabriel. "Made it through," Tom said, gesturing to his truck bed loaded with supplies. "Took me 3 hours for a drive that should have been 40 minutes. Snow's not letting up." "Appreciate it," Luke said, already reaching for the bags. Tom grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Luke, how is he?" "Alive," Luke said, still breathing. "Taking some fluids." "That's more than I expected." Tom studied Luke's face with the frank assessment of old friendship. "You look like hell." "When's the last time you ate?" Luke had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, maybe. The toast he hadn't tasted." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on fumes." Tom released his arm and reached into the cab of his truck, pulling out a thermos and a wrapped package. "Martha sent soup and bread. You're going to eat while I sit with your horse. Tom, I didn't drive through a blizzard on Christmas morning to argue with you." Tom's voice carried the firmness of someone who'd known Luke since they were both teenagers, working summer jobs at the livestock auction. "Eat, I'll watch Gabriel." The name stopped Tom mid-step. "Gabriel." "Seemed right," Luke said. Something shifted in Tom's expression, a softness that made Luke look away. "It's a good name," Tom said quietly. Then more briskly, "Now go eat that soup before Martha has my hide for letting you starve." Luke took the food back to the cabin, though he left the door open so he could hear if Tom called. The soup was Martha's special recipe, the kind she made when someone in the community was sick or grieving. Chicken and vegetables in a rich broth that tasted like comfort. Luke ate standing at the counter, surprised by his own hunger once he started. When he returned to the barn, he found Tom sitting in the straw beside Gabriel, one weathered hand resting on the horse's neck. Tom looked up, and Luke saw concern mixed with something that might have been hope. "He's got spirit," Tom said. "Can see it in his eyes. Still wants to live." "Yeah." Luke knelt on Gabriel's other side. "Someone worked hard to break that spirit. Look at these scars." Tom examined the marks Luke indicated, his jaw tightening. "I've seen work like this before. There's a man, Cade Marlowe. He runs a place about 60 miles east, deals in horses. Got a reputation for breaking animals through force. People who know better don't sell to him, but there's always someone who needs money bad enough not to ask questions." "You think this horse came from him?" "Can't say for certain. But that brand on the halter," Tom pointed to the marking Luke had noticed. "That's Marlowe's mark. CM stands for Cade Marlowe. He brands everything he touches." Luke felt his hands curl into fists. If Gabriel came from Marlowe, he was probably stolen. A horse this well-built, even starved, shows good bloodlines. "Someone's missing him." "Maybe," Tom agreed. "Or maybe whoever had him before sold him to Marlowe not knowing what the man does. Either way, if Marlowe comes looking, you might have trouble." "Let him come," Luke said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Gabriel's not going back to that." Tom nodded slowly. "All right then. We'll deal with that if it happens. For now, let's focus on getting this boy healthy." They spent the next hour organizing the supplies Tom had brought. Professional-grade electrolyte powder, vitamin supplements, high-calorie feeding paste designed for horses recovering from illness, antibiotics that were current, unlike the expired bottle Luke had been prepared to use. Wound care supplies and medications Martha had contributed from her own stockpile. "She raises alpacas," Tom explained when Luke looked surprised at the bounty. "Uses a lot of the same medications. Said to tell you Gabriel's in her prayers." "Tell her I said thanks," Luke managed, the words catching slightly in his throat. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community, to have people who cared what happened on his isolated ranch. Tom left around noon, making Luke promise to call if anything changed. The storm showed no signs of abating, but Tom navigated away with the confidence of someone who'd driven Montana winters for 60 years. Luke returned to his routine with Gabriel, feeding the horse small amounts every 2 hours, applying medications to wounds, keeping the stall clean and warm. Somewhere around the third feeding, something shifted. Gabriel turned his head toward Luke when he entered the stall, ears forward, tracking Luke's movement with interest rather than fear. "Hey there," Luke said softly, moving slowly so as not to startle. He held out his hand, letting Gabriel catch his scent. The horse's nostrils flared, taking in information. Then Gabriel did something that made Luke's breath catch. The horse stretched his neck forward and very gently touched his muzzle to Luke's palm. Just a brief contact, the barest whisper of connection. But it spoke of trust beginning to form, of a bridge being built between two damaged souls. "Yeah," Luke whispered, throat tight. "We're going to be all right, you and me." As Christmas Day faded into evening, Luke pulled up an old wooden chair and positioned it where he could see Gabriel clearly. He opened one of the Western novels he'd loved as a kid, books about cowboys and horses and the kind of straightforward problems that could be solved with grit and determination. "Might as well read to you," Luke said to Gabriel. "Nothing else to do while we wait for your next feeding." He began to read aloud, his voice filling the barn's silence. Gabriel's eyes stayed on him, ears pricked forward, and Luke found himself relaxing into the rhythm of the story. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, in the warm glow of the heat lamps, a man and a horse shared the quiet evening, bound together by circumstance and the simple need to not be alone. New Year arrived not with celebration, but with the quiet turning of calendar pages that Luke barely acknowledged. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving the valley buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the weak January sun. Inside the barn, Gabriel grew stronger day by day, a transformation that seemed almost miraculous to Luke, who'd expected to be digging a grave instead of mixing another batch of nutrient-rich feed. The horse could stand now, though not for long periods. Luke would support Gabriel's weight with his own body, letting the gelding test his legs, rebuild the muscles that starvation had wasted away. It was hard work, the kind that left Luke's back aching and his shoulders burning, but he welcomed the physical exhaustion. It meant less time for thinking, for remembering, for standing at the edge of the abyss that had defined his last 5 years. Gabriel's coat began to show its true color as health returned. A rich chestnut that caught the light, darker along the mane and tail. Without the layers of filth and the sharp angles of starvation, the horse revealed himself as something close to beautiful. Well-proportioned, with a deep chest and clean legs that spoke of good breeding. Someone had loved this horse once, had chosen him carefully and invested in his training. Luke spent hours in the barn, often sleeping there despite the cold. He'd brought out the old quilt Sarah had made during their second winter together, when money was tight, and they'd spent evenings by the wood stove while she stitched together patches of fabric salvaged from worn-out clothes. The quilt still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she'd tucked into the linen closet. Luke wrapped it around Gabriel during the coldest nights, layering it over the regular blankets, and told himself it was just practical. The horse needed warmth, but sometimes he'd touch the worn fabric and feel Sarah's presence like a benediction, as if she'd somehow known this quilt would one day serve to save a life, to give Luke a reason to keep going. "I talked to him about you," Luke said one evening, sitting cross-legged in the straw while Gabriel dozed nearby. He wasn't sure who he was addressing. Sarah, God, the empty air, Tell him about the remedies you used, the way you could calm any animal just by being patient with it. He listens better than most people did. Gabriel's ear swiveled toward Luke's voice, the rest of his body remaining still, that particular state of restful awareness horses achieve when they feel safe. "Emma would have loved you," Luke continued, the words coming easier in the dim barn than they ever did in daylight. "She always wanted a horse of her own. Not just riding butterscotch or thunder, but one that was hers. We were going to get her one for her 8th birthday. He paused, throat tight. That would have been 2 months after the accident. The grief lived in his chest like a stone, smoothed by time, but no less heavy. Luke had learned you didn't get over loss like this. You just got used to carrying it. But somehow, sitting here with Gabriel, the weight felt more bearable. Shared, maybe, with a creature who'd known his own kind of suffering. As Gabriel grew stronger, Luke began the gentle process of retraining. Not breaking, never breaking, but rebuilding the trust that violence had destroyed. He'd move slowly through the stall, letting Gabriel track his movements, never approaching directly, but allowing the horse to come to him when ready. When Gabriel would stretch his neck out to sniff Luke's hand, Luke would praise him softly, sometimes offering a piece of carrot or apple as reward. "Good boy," Luke would murmur. "That's real good, Gabriel." The horse's eyes, which had been dull and hopeless that first night, now held something approaching curiosity. Gabriel would watch Luke work, ears pricked forward, and occasionally vocalize with small nickers that seemed to ask questions or simply express contentment. One afternoon in mid-January, Luke was grooming Gabriel when he felt the horse lean into the curry comb, pushing against the pressure the way a contented horse does. It was such a normal gesture, the kind Luke had seen thousands of times in his life, but coming from Gabriel, it felt like a gift, an acknowledgement that they'd crossed some invisible threshold from stranger to friend. "Yeah," Luke said, throat unexpectedly tight. "Feels good, doesn't it? Being taken care of." He worked methodically, running the comb over Gabriel's body in slow circles, watching for any sign of discomfort. The worst of the wounds had healed cleanly, thanks to Sarah's salve and Luke's diligent care. The scars would remain, permanent records of cruelty, but they no longer wept or threatened infection. When Luke ran his hands down Gabriel's legs, checking the joints and hooves, he discovered just how badly neglected the horse had been. The hooves needed serious work, overgrown and cracked in ways that would have made every step painful. Luke had some experience with farrier work, enough to do basic trimming, but Gabriel would need professional help eventually. Once the roads cleared and Luke felt ready to bring someone else into their quiet sanctuary. Tom visited weekly now, usually bringing supplies, but also, Luke suspected, checking on Luke himself. On one of these visits, Tom brought a halter he'd ordered specially, soft leather lined with fleece to prevent rubbing on Gabriel's scarred face. "Thought he might appreciate something that doesn't hurt," Tom said, handing it over. Luke turned the halter in his hands, noting the quality craftsmanship, the careful attention to detail. "Tom, this is expensive. Consider it a late Christmas present." Tom waved off Luke's protest. "Martha and I were just glad to see you engaged with something again. With someone, even if that someone happens to have 4 legs and eat hay." Luke fitted the new halter on Gabriel, adjusting the straps carefully. The horse stood perfectly still, accepting the change with the patience of an animal who'd learned that sometimes submission was the path to less pain. But when Luke stepped back, Gabriel immediately shook his head, as if testing this new feeling, then turned to look at Luke with what could only be described as approval. "He likes it," Luke said, unable to keep the smile from his voice. "Course he does. That's quality leather." Tom leaned against the stall door, watching Gabriel with the assessing eye of someone who'd worked with horses his entire life. "He's put on weight. Moving better. You've done good work here, Luke." "He did the work," Luke said. "I just gave him a chance. That's all any of us need sometimes," Tom said quietly. "Just someone to give us a chance." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Gabriel explore his stall with increasing confidence. The horse nuzzled at the water bucket, then turned his attention to investigating a loose strand of hay hanging from the rack. "Tom," Luke said after a while, "if Marlowe comes asking about Gabriel, what do I say?" "The truth, I suppose. That you found a dying horse on your property and saved its life. Finders keepers applies to livestock, legally speaking, especially if the animal was abandoned. Of course, if Gabriel was stolen originally, that complicates things. We should try to find his real owner," Luke said, though the words cost him something. The thought of losing Gabriel made his chest tighten in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. "We should," Tom agreed. "But let's wait until spring. Give you more time with him, and give Gabriel time to heal completely. Nobody's going anywhere in this snow anyway." Luke nodded, grateful for the reprieve. He knew it was selfish, wanting to keep Gabriel when somewhere someone might be mourning their lost horse. But for the first time in 5 years, Luke had something beyond his own grief to wake up for. A reason to get out of bed, to care about whether the day was good or bad, to plan for tomorrow instead of just enduring it. That evening, after Tom had left and the sun had set in bands of pink and gold behind the mountains, Luke entered Emma's room for the second time since her death. The first had been on her birthday last year, standing in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. This time, he walked to her desk and picked up the wooden horse he'd carved for her 6th birthday. He'd spent weeks on it, working in the evenings after she'd gone to bed, sanding the pine smooth and painting it white with black spots. Because Emma had insisted her dream horse looked exactly like the horses in her favorite storybook. The toy horse stood maybe 8 inches tall, with a flowing mane and proud neck. Luke carried it to the barn and set it on the shelf where Gabriel could see it. "Emma's horse," he said to Gabriel, who watched with those intelligent dark eyes. "She loved horses, loved everything about them. Would have loved taking care of you, brushing you, maybe braiding your mane with ribbons, even though you're a boy, and wouldn't appreciate it." Gabriel moved forward slowly and stretched his neck out to sniff the wooden toy. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of old paint and pine and whatever trace of Emma's childhood hands might remain after all these years. Then the horse exhaled gently, a soft breath that stirred the air, and returned his attention to Luke. "Yeah," Luke said, reaching out to stroke Gabriel's neck. "She would have loved you, just like I do." The words surprised him, spoken aloud before he'd fully thought them through. But they were true. Somewhere in the weeks of desperate care, of 2-hour feeding schedules and careful wound treatment, of quiet conversations in the barn's dim light, Luke had fallen in love with this horse. Not as a replacement for what he'd lost. You couldn't replace a wife and daughter with a 4-legged creature who communicated in knickers and ear flicks. But as something new, a different kind of love, one built on mutual need and the slow rebuilding of trust. Gabriel leaned his head against Luke's shoulder, and Luke wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, feeling the warmth and solid reality of another living being choosing to trust him, to accept his care, to build a bond that went beyond mere survival. Late January brought a brief thaw that turned the world to mud and slush before freezing solid again. Gabriel could move freely now, pacing his stall with increasing restlessness, clearly ready for more space and activity than 4 walls could provide. Luke began taking him outside for short periods, leading him around the barnyard at a walk, letting the horse stretch his legs and breathe fresh air. The first time Gabriel felt snow under his hooves again, he stopped dead, every muscle tense, as if the sensation brought back memories of that hollow where Luke had found him. But Luke just stood quietly, one hand on the lead rope waiting. After a long moment, Gabriel took a tentative step forward, then another. By the 3rd circuit of the barnyard, the horse was moving with something approaching ease, head up, ears pricked at the ravens calling from the pine trees. "That's it," Luke encouraged. "Nothing here's going to hurt you." But hurt came anyway, just not in the form either of them expected. Tom arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, with supplies and news that wiped the peace from Luke's face. He waited until they'd unloaded the truck and stepped inside the barn's relative warmth before speaking. "Marlowe's been asking around town about a bay gelding that went missing from his place last month, offering a reward." Luke's hand stilled on the bag of feed he'd been opening. "Did he describe Gabriel?" "General description could fit a lot of horses," Tom said carefully. But he specifically mentioned the horse wore one of his halters, the old leather one with his brand mark. Luke glanced at the corner where he'd thrown the ruined halter, meaning to dispose of it, but never getting around to the task. Evidence of Gabriel's origins, sitting there like a loaded gun. "He's asking people to keep an eye out," Tom continued. "Said the horse has value, implied it was stolen from him." "It was stolen," Luke said flatly. "Just not by me, and not in the way he's suggesting," Tom nodded. "That's what I figured. Question is, what do you want to do about it?" Luke moved to Gabriel's stall, where the horse stood watching them with alert interest. Gabriel had learned to recognize Tom's voice as belonging to a friend, someone safe. He nickered softly, hoping for treats. "Gabriel wasn't always Marlowe's," Luke said, thinking out loud. "Look at him, Tom, even half-starved, you can see the quality. This was someone's champion, someone's beloved horse. Marlowe got his hands on him somehow and did his best to destroy what made Gabriel special. So we find out who owned him before," Tom said. "The halter's got to be registered somewhere. Horses like this usually have papers, microchips even. Can you ask around, quietly? I don't want Marlowe knowing Gabriel's here until we've got a full picture of what happened." "I can do that." Tom pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the brand mark on the old halter, of Gabriel's distinctive markings. "Give me a few days. I know some people who know people." After Tom left, Luke stood in Gabriel's stall for a long time, just breathing in the comfortable smell of horse and hay, trying to settle the anxiety coiling in his gut. He'd known this peace couldn't last forever, known that saving Gabriel meant eventually facing whatever complications came with him. But knowing didn't make it easier. "Nobody's taking you back to that," Luke said to Gabriel. "Whatever I have to do, however I have to fight. You're safe here." Gabriel lipped at Luke's pocket, searching for the apple slices Luke had taken to carrying. Luke produced one and held it flat on his palm, feeling the horse's soft muzzle against his skin, the gentle way Gabriel took the treat without nipping. "Good boy," Luke murmured. "Such a good boy." The days that followed passed with the strange tension of waiting for a storm you can see building on the horizon. Luke continued Gabriel's care and rehabilitation, expanding their time outside, introducing basic groundwork exercises that would rebuild the horse's strength and confidence. Gabriel responded with the eagerness of an animal who'd been trained before, who understood what was being asked and wanted to please. "You were someone's pride and joy," Luke said during one of these sessions, watching Gabriel respond to simple voice commands, moving forward and stopping without resistance. "Someone loved you, taught you well. What happened, boy? How did you end up with Marlowe?" Gabriel couldn't answer, of course, but the question haunted Luke. At night, lying in bed in the cabin, he'd try to piece together a story from the evidence. A valuable horse, well-trained, somehow ending up in the hands of a man known for breaking animals through cruelty. Stolen at auction, bought through fraudulent means, or had someone desperate for money sold their beloved horse to the first buyer without asking enough questions. On the 5th day after Tom's warning, Luke received a call just after dawn. "Found something," Tom said without preamble. "You got a pen?" "This is going to take a while." Luke grabbed a notebook and settled at the kitchen table, listening as Tom laid out what he'd discovered. The halter's brand mark was indeed registered to Cade Marlowe, but Tom had dug deeper, using connections in the regional horse registry. 2 years ago, a chestnut gelding matching Gabriel's description had been reported stolen from a stable in Wyoming. The horse's name was Heaven's Gate, and he'd been a championship jumper owned by an elderly woman named Ellen Crawford. Ellen's husband bred and trained jumpers for 40 years, Tom explained. Heaven's Gate was his last horse, the culmination of his breeding program. When Richard Crawford died 3 years ago, Ellen kept Heaven's Gate as a memorial to her husband. The horse was everything to her. Luke's chest tightened. "And someone stole him?" "Stole him right out of her barn in the middle of the night." Police investigated but never found evidence. Ellen was devastated. She assumed the horse was dead, that whoever took him had sold him for slaughter or worse. "She needs to know he's alive," Luke said immediately, even as the words cost him. Gabriel had become his. his responsibility, his friend, his reason for getting up in the morning. But before that, Gabriel had been Heaven's Gate, beloved by a grieving widow who'd lost her husband's final gift. "There's more," Tom said. "I found sale records. About 18 months ago, Marlowe purchased a chestnut gelding from an auction in Wyoming. The paperwork looks legitimate on the surface, but the horse was listed as a grade gelding. No papers, no history. Someone set up that sale to launder a stolen horse. So Marlowe might not have personally stolen him," Luke said, "but he knowingly bought a stolen horse. That'd be my guess. And judging by Gabriel's condition when you found him, Marlowe didn't treat him well once he figured out the horse wouldn't break easy." Luke closed his eyes, seeing again that first night. Gabriel half buried in snow, dying alone. Ellen Crawford's beloved horse, her last connection to her husband, reduced to something Marlowe had thrown away like trash when it proved too spirited to torture into submission. "I need Ellen Crawford's number," Luke said. "Luke, you sure?" "Once you make that call, Gabriel becomes Heaven's Gate again. He goes back to Wyoming. He belongs to her," Luke said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "She lost her husband, then lost his horse. I know what that kind of loss does to a person, Tom. I can't let her keep suffering when I could end it." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You're a good man, Luke. Better than most." "I'm selfish enough to hope she'll let me visit," Luke said. "Once he's fully healed. Once he's back where he belongs. I'll text you her information," Tom said. "Luke, I'm proud of you." The call ended and Luke sat staring at his phone, waiting for the text to arrive. When it did, he looked at the number for a long time before finally walking out to the barn. Gabriel lifted his head at Luke's approach, nickering a greeting, the sound full of trust and affection. Luke entered the stall and wrapped his arms around Gabriel's neck, breathing in the scent of horse and hay and the faint lingering smell of Sarah's healing salve. "I have to call your mom," Luke whispered. "Your real mom, the one who loved you before the world got cruel. But I need you to know that I love you too. You saved me, Gabriel. When I was as close to dying as you were, just in a different way. You gave me a reason to keep going." Gabriel turned his head, resting his chin on Luke's shoulder, in that way horses do when they're offering comfort. As if somehow the horse understood that this moment marked an ending and a beginning, and that both could be true at once. Luke pulled out his phone and dialed before he could lose his nerve. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious in the way of people who don't recognize the number. "Mrs. Crawford, my name is Luke Thorne. I'm calling about a horse that was stolen from you 2 years ago. A chestnut gelding named Heaven's Gate." The sound Ellen Crawford made was somewhere between a sob and a laugh, disbelief and hope mixing in that single breath. "My Heaven's Gate? But I thought, they told me he was gone. He's alive, Mrs. Crawford. He's here on my ranch in Montana, and he's safe." The conversation with Ellen Crawford lasted nearly an hour, her questions tumbling out between tears and laughter. How had Luke found him? What condition was he in? Did Heaven's Gate remember his training? Would he ever recover? Luke answered each question honestly, describing the Christmas Eve discovery, the desperate fight to save the horse's life, the slow rebuilding of trust and health. He sent photos from his phone, images of Gabriel standing in the warm barn, his coat glossy now, eyes bright and alert. "He's beautiful," Ellen whispered, and Luke could hear her crying. "My Richard would be so grateful to you." "So grateful. Mrs. Crawford," Luke began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what he needed to say. "Gabriel, Heaven's Gate, he's been through a lot. The man who had him, Cade Marlowe, he wasn't kind. The horse has scars, physical and otherwise. He'll need more time to fully heal." "I understand," Ellen said. "Mr. Thorne, I can't travel to Montana right now. I'm 81 years old and my health isn't what it was. But as soon as the weather breaks, as soon as I can arrange transportation, I want to come see him." "Of course. Whenever you're ready, he'll be here and he'll be safe. Mr. Thorne, Luke, if I may, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you want to keep him?" Ellen's question was gentle, without judgment. "Because everything you've described, the care you've given, the bond you've built, That's not just duty, that's love. Luke looked at Gabriel, who stood watching him with those knowing eyes. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Crawford. Yes, I want to keep him. But he's yours. He was yours before I knew he existed, and he'll be yours long after. I'm grateful I got to know him. Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Let me come visit, she finally said. Let me see him, make sure he's truly all right. And then we'll talk about what's best for Heaven's Gate. Fair. Fair, Luke agreed, though his heart sank. Once Ellen saw her beloved horse, saw how well he'd recovered, she'd want to take him home. And Luke would have to let him go, the way you let go of anything that was never yours to keep. After the call ended, Luke returned to the barn and sat in the straw beside Gabriel, running his hands over the horse's neck, memorizing the feel of warm hide and muscle. The way Gabriel's mane fell across his fingers, the particular smell of this specific horse who'd become the center of Luke's slowly reconstructing life. She loves you, Luke said to Gabriel. Your first mom. She never stopped loving you, never stopped grieving for you. I have to give you back to her, boy. It's the right thing. Gabriel lowered his head and rested it against Luke's chest, a gesture of complete trust that made Luke's throat close up. February crept forward with the reluctant pace of Montana winter. Luke threw himself into Gabriel's care with renewed intensity, as if by perfecting every aspect of the horse's rehabilitation, he could somehow earn the right to keep him. He worked with Gabriel daily now, not just walking, but introducing light trotting, testing the horse's strength and flexibility. Gabriel responded beautifully, his natural athleticism returning as his body healed. Luke could see glimpses of the championship jumper he'd once been, the powerful hindquarters propelling him forward, the graceful neck arching, the intelligent way he navigated obstacles in the barnyard. This horse had been bred for greatness, trained by someone who understood the art of bringing out an animal's best qualities. Luke found himself searching online late at night, looking up Richard Crawford's breeding program, watching videos of Heaven's Gate competing in shows years ago. There was Gabriel, younger and gleaming, sailing over jumps with the kind of effortless grace that made it look easy. And there, beside the ring, was Ellen, younger too, her face alight with pride as she watched her husband's horse perform. That horse deserved to go home. That woman deserved to have her husband's legacy returned. Luke knew this in his bones, even as every other part of him wanted to rage against the unfairness of finding something precious, only to have to give it away. In the cabin one evening, Luke finally opened the stack of unopened letters that had been piling up for 5 years. Letters from Margaret, Sarah's sister, begging him to visit, to meet his niece and nephew, to rejoin the family he'd cut himself off from after the accident. The most recent letter, dated 3 months ago, was different. Luke, Margaret had written in her careful hand, I'm not asking you to forget Sarah and Emma. I'm asking you to honor them by living. They wouldn't have wanted you to bury yourself alive. Please, please come visit. Let us love you. Let yourself be part of a family again. Luke sat with the letter for a long time, Sarah's wedding ring warm against his chest, Gabriel's gentle breathing audible from the barn. Margaret was right. Sarah would be furious if she could see what Luke had become, the way he'd let grief transform him from a man into a ghost. Emma would be heartbroken to know her daddy had stopped living when she died. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Margaret before he could change his mind. I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there. Thank you for not giving up on me. The reply came within minutes. We'll be here whenever you're ready. We love you. 3 simple words that Luke hadn't heard or allowed himself to hear in 5 years. We love you, as if love was something that persisted despite absence, despite grief, despite all the ways a person could fail to deserve it. The next morning, Tom arrived with news that made Luke's blood run cold. Marlowe knows, Tom said without preamble. Someone in town mentioned seeing a chestnut gelding at your place. He's coming, Luke, probably today. Let him come, Luke said, surprised by how calm he sounded. Gabriel's not going back to that. He's going to claim ownership. Show forged paperwork, probably. Make a scene. Then I'll show him the real paperwork. Ellen emailed me Heaven's Gate's registration papers, his microchip number, all of it. Marlowe can claim whatever he wants, but the truth is documented. Tom nodded slowly. You've changed, you know that? The Luke I knew 6 months ago would have avoided confrontation at any cost. Now here you are, ready to fight. I've got something worth fighting for, Luke said simply. They didn't have to wait long. Around noon, a truck pulled up the long drive, sleek and expensive, completely at odds with the rural setting. Gade Marlowe emerged from the driver's side, a man in his 50s, with the kind of build that suggested he enjoyed intimidating people. 2 other men got out with him, both large and unfriendly looking. Luke met them in front of the barn, positioning himself so they couldn't see Gabriel in his stall. Tom stood beside him, arms crossed, a solid presence. You Thorne? Marlowe asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I am. Got a stolen horse on your property. Chestnut gelding, about 15 hands, wearing my halter. I'm here to collect him and press charges for theft. I found a dying horse on my property on Christmas Eve, Luke said evenly. Half-starved, abused, left to die in the snow. I saved his life. And he's not yours. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. I got paperwork says otherwise. Bought that horse legal at auction. He ran off, got spooked in a storm. Been looking for him since. Your paperwork's fake, Luke said. That horse is Heaven's Gate, stolen 2 years ago from Ellen Crawford in Wyoming. I've got his real registration, his microchip scan, and Mrs. Crawford ready to testify. Something flickered in Marlowe's expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. Don't know what you're talking about. That's my horse. Then you won't mind if I call the sheriff, Luke said, pulling out his phone. We can sort this out officially. Review the documents, scan for the microchip, let the law decide. You're making a mistake, Marlowe said, voice dropping to something meant to be threatening. I don't take kindly to people stealing from me. Neither do I, Luke said. And you stole from Ellen Crawford when you bought a horse you knew was stolen. You abused him, nearly killed him, and then abandoned him to die. So you'll excuse me if I'm not particularly concerned about what you take kindly to. Marlowe took a step forward, and his 2 companions moved with him. Tom shifted, putting his hand on something in his coat pocket. Luke didn't move, just kept his eyes on Marlowe, everything in him focused on protecting Gabriel. Last chance, Marlowe said. Hand over the horse, or there's going to be trouble. Then there's going to be trouble, Luke said. The standoff might have turned violent if not for the sound of an engine approaching. Sheriff Rita Dawson's patrol car came up the drive, lights flashing. She pulled to a stop and got out, hand resting casually on her service weapon. You shouldn't be alone on Christmas, the cowboy whispered to the starving horse, then led him home. Gentlemen, she said pleasantly, got a call about a disturbance. Everything all right here? Sheriff, Luke said. Mr. Marlowe here is claiming ownership of a horse I rescued. I'd like to file a formal report about animal abuse and theft. Marlowe's face went red. He's the thief. That's my horse. Then you won't mind providing documentation, Sheriff Dawson said. Registration papers, bill of sale, microchip records. Mr. Thorne, you have the same? I do, Luke said. And I've got Ellen Crawford, the horse's legal owner, ready to verify everything. Sheriff Dawson nodded. Mr. Marlowe, I'm going to need you and your friends to wait by your vehicle while we sort this out. Any trouble, and I'll arrest you for trespassing and intimidation. The standoff dissolved as Marlowe realized he was outmaneuvered. He retreated to his truck, muttering threats that everyone pretended not to hear. Sheriff Dawson took statements, examined documents, and even brought out a scanner to check Gabriel's microchip. The chip matched Heaven's Gate's registration. Case closed. Mr. Marlowe, Sheriff Dawson said, voice now official and cold, you're free to go, but I'm opening an investigation into your purchase of this animal and your treatment of him. Expect more questions. Marlowe left without another word, his expensive truck roaring away down the drive. When the dust settled, Luke found himself shaking, adrenaline finally catching up. You did good, Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. Real good. Sheriff Dawson handed Luke her card. Mrs. Crawford called me yesterday, asked me to keep an eye on things. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, Luke agreed. She also said something interesting, Dawson continued. Said she'd been thinking about what's best for Heaven's Gate. Said maybe Montana agrees with him. Luke's heart kicked. What do you mean? Caller, Dawson said with a small smile. I think you two need to have a conversation. Luke waited until he was alone, standing in Gabriel's stall with his phone in hand before he called Ellen Crawford back. His hands were shaking, though whether from the confrontation with Marlowe or from hope he didn't dare name, he couldn't say. Luke, Ellen answered on the first ring. Sheriff Dawson called me. She said there was trouble. Marlowe came, Luke said. Tried to claim Gabriel. But Sheriff Dawson helped sort it out. Marlowe left empty-handed. Thank God. Ellen's relief was palpable. And Heaven's Gate. Gabriel, he's all right? He's fine. Didn't even know there was danger. Luke watched as Gabriel dozed in the afternoon sun, streaming through the barn window, completely at peace. Mrs. Crawford, Sheriff Dawson said I should call you. Said you'd been thinking. A long pause. Then Ellen spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a decision clearly wrestled with. Luke, I'm 81 years old. My health is failing. Not dramatically, not immediately, but I'm realistic about my limitations. I can't care for a horse anymore, not the way Richard and I used to. And Heaven's Gate, he was Richard's dream, Richard's legacy. But Richard's gone. Luke's throat tightened. I understand. No, wait. Let me finish. Ellen took a breath. I've been making calls. Talked to veterinarians, to the sheriff, to people who know you in Ironwood. Everyone says the same thing. You saved my horse's life. You gave him back his spirit. And more than that, he gave you back yours. Mrs. Crawford, please call me Ellen, and please let me say this. Her voice trembled slightly. When I lost Heaven's Gate 2 years ago, I thought I'd lost the last piece of Richard. I grieved for that horse the way I grieved for my husband. I've been so angry, so lost. And then you called, and for a moment I thought I could have him back, could hold on to Richard's legacy just a little longer. Luke waited, barely breathing. But that would be selfish, Ellen continued. Heaven's Gate, Gabriel. Whoever he is now, he's found a new home. A man who needs him as much as he needed saving. And I think, Luke, I think Richard would approve. He always said horses should be where they're most loved, most needed. Are you saying? Luke couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't let himself believe. I'm saying I want you to keep him, Ellen said, and now she was crying. I'm saying Heaven's Gate belongs with you. I'll sign over the papers, make it all legal. He's yours, Luke, if you want him. Luke's vision blurred. He reached out and placed his hand on Gabriel's warm neck, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath his palm. I want him, he whispered. More than I can say. Then he's yours. But Luke, I have one condition. Anything. Let me visit. In the spring, when I can travel. Let me see him one more time, healthy and happy. Let me meet the man who saved my husband's horse, and let me thank you properly. Ellen, you don't need to thank me. I do, though. You've given me peace, Luke. You've given me closure. You've let me know that Richard's legacy lives on in good hands. That's worth more than you can imagine. After the call ended, Luke stood in the stall for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Gabriel was his. Not borrowed, not temporarily saved, but genuinely, legally his. The horse who'd pulled him back from the edge of giving up entirely now belonged to him. You hear that, boy? Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. You're staying. You're home? Gabriel lifted his head and looked at Luke with those dark, knowing eyes. Then the horse took 2 steps forward and rested his forehead against Luke's chest. A gesture so full of trust and affection that Luke had to wrap his arms around the horse's neck and let himself cry for the first time since the funeral 5 years ago. He cried for Sarah and Emma, for the life he'd lost and the years he'd wasted in grief. He cried for Gabriel and the suffering the horse had endured. He cried for Ellen Crawford and her generous heart, for Tom and Martha's patient friendship, for Margaret's persistent love. And finally he cried from relief and something that might have been joy, rusty and uncertain, but unmistakably there. When the tears finally stopped, Luke felt lighter than he had in years, as if something that had been pressing on his chest for half a decade had finally lifted, allowing him to breathe fully again. Over the next several days, Luke felt the ranch transform around him. Or maybe he transformed and saw the ranch differently. Either way, the place that had been a self-imposed prison began to look like a home again. Like a place with a future. He started making plans. The barn needed expansion if he was going to keep Gabriel long-term and maybe eventually take in other horses. Rescued animals, perhaps, the way Gabriel had been rescued. There was something appealing about the idea of creating a sanctuary, a place where broken creatures could heal. Tom came by and found Luke measuring the barn's south wall, sketching plans on a legal pad. "What's all this?" Tom asked. "Thinking about expanding," Luke said. "Maybe adding 3 more stalls. And I'll need a proper pasture with good fencing. Gabriel deserves room to run." Tom's smile was knowing. "And here I thought you'd given up on the future." "Yeah, well," Luke looked toward the barn where Gabriel was visible through the window, standing alert and healthy. "Turns out the future had different plans for me. You thinking about taking in more horses?" Maybe. Is that crazy?" "Not even a little," Tom said. "Fact is, I know of 2 horses right now that need homes. Owner passed away, family can't keep them. They're going to auction next month unless someone steps up." Luke felt something settle in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since before the accident. "Tell me about them." As Tom described the horses, both older mares with gentle temperaments, Luke found himself nodding. Yes, he could do this. He could take these animals in, give them a soft place to land, the way Gabriel had given him a reason to keep going. "I'll need help," Luke admitted. "I can handle the care, but paperwork, legalities, setting up a proper rescue operation, that's beyond me." "Martha's been volunteering with animal rescue for 20 years, Tom said. "She'd help you set things up, probably rope in half the town to assist. You'd be surprised how many people have been wanting to see this place come alive again." That evening, Luke called Margaret. "Luke," his sister-in-law's voice held surprise and hope. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's okay," Luke said, and realized he meant it. "Better than okay. Margaret, I need to tell you what's been happening." He told her everything. Finding Gabriel on Christmas Eve, the desperate fight to save him, the slow building of trust between damaged man and damaged horse. Ellen Crawford's gift, Tom and Martha's support, the plans he was making for the future. Words poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. 5 years of silence finding its voice. Margaret cried as she listened. "Sarah would be so proud of you," she said, when Luke finally stopped talking. "Emma, too. Luke, they wouldn't want you to forget them, but they wouldn't want you to stop living either." "I know that now," Luke said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Don't apologize. Grief doesn't follow a schedule." Margaret paused. Could we visit? In the spring, maybe. I'd love to meet Gabriel. And I think my kids should know their uncle." "I'd like that," Luke said, and meant it. "I'd like that a lot." After the call, Luke went out to the barn. Gabriel was awake, munching hay, and he nickered a greeting when Luke entered the stall. "Got some news, boy," Luke said, settling into his usual spot in the straw. "We're going to have visitors in spring. Ellen first, then Margaret and her family. And Tom knows some horses that need homes. This place is about to get a lot busier." Gabriel continued eating, unbothered by the news, trusting that whatever Luke decided would be fine. "We're going to build something good here," Luke continued. "Something that matters. A place where broken things can heal. Where second chances are possible." He pulled Sarah's wedding ring out from under his shirt, looking at the gold band that had hung against his heart for 5 years. For the first time, he could look at it without feeling like he was drowning. The love it represented hadn't died with Sarah. Love didn't work that way. It lived on in memory, in the lessons learned, in the way it shaped you into someone capable of loving again. "I'm going to be okay," Luke whispered to the ring, to Sarah, to Emma, to whatever ghosts had been haunting him. "I'm going to live again. Not instead of loving you, but because of loving you. Because you taught me how." Gabriel finished his hay and came over to Luke, lowering his head so Luke could scratch behind his ears. They sat together in the quiet barn, man and horse, both saved by a Christmas Eve that had seemed like an ending, but turned out to be a beginning. Tomorrow, Luke would start the barn expansion plans. Tomorrow he'd call the owner of the 2 mares and arrange their transfer. Tomorrow he'd begin the work of building a future. But tonight he simply sat with Gabriel and felt grateful. Grateful for the second chance neither of them should have survived to receive. Grateful for the people who'd refused to give up on him, even when he'd given up on himself. Grateful for the mysterious way life sometimes delivers exactly what you need in the form of something you have to save. "You know what, Gabriel?" Luke said softly. "You shouldn't have been alone on Christmas, and neither should I, so I guess we saved each other." Gabriel's ear flicked toward Luke's voice, and in the dim barn light, Luke could have sworn the horse was smiling. March arrived with false promises of spring, teasing with warm days that melted snow before freezing everything solid again at night. But Luke barely noticed the weather's fickleness. He was too busy planning, building, preparing for the future that had seemed impossible just months ago. The barn expansion progressed faster than expected, with Tom bringing in favors from contractors who owed him. Luke discovered that he still had skills from his old life before grief had hollowed him out. He'd been a search and rescue specialist once, trained in wilderness survival, in reading terrain and weather, in staying calm under pressure. That training served him well now as he coordinated schedules, solved problems, and made decisions about the ranch's future. "You're good at this," Tom observed one afternoon, watching Luke direct the placement of new fence posts. "The organizing, the planning. Natural leader." Luke shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just trying to do right by Gabriel, by any horse that ends up here." "It's more than that," Tom insisted. "You're building something that matters, a sanctuary. People are noticing," and they were. Word spread through Ironwood about Luke Thorne's transformation, about the rescued horse and the plans for more. People Luke barely remembered started showing up with donations, feed and supplies, offers of volunteer work, even financial contributions. It seemed the community had been waiting for years for Luke to come back to life, and now that he had, they wanted to help. One evening, Martha arrived with a box of paperwork. "If you're serious about running a rescue operation, you'll need proper legal structure," she explained, spreading documents across Luke's kitchen table. "Nonprofit status, liability insurance, volunteer protocols. It's not as complicated as it looks, but it needs to be done right." Luke stared at the forms, momentarily overwhelmed. This was real. He was really doing this. "I'll help you through it," Martha said gently, seeing his expression. "You're not alone in this, Luke. You've got a whole community behind you." He worked through the paperwork over several nights, Gabriel dozing in his stall while Luke filled out forms by lamplight in the barn. There was something peaceful about the work, something that felt like building a foundation strong enough to last. The two older mares arrived in early March, transported by Tom in a borrowed trailer. Both were gentle souls, well cared for in their previous life, but needing a soft place to land after their owner's death. Luke named them Grace and Mercy because that's what they represented. The second chances that life sometimes offered when you least expected them. Gabriel welcomed the mares with curiosity rather than aggression, and within days, the three horses had formed a small herd. Luke found himself smiling as he watched them interact, the simple joy of seeing animals be animals, free from fear or pain. But not everything was peaceful. One morning, Luke found a note nailed to his barn door. No signature, but the message was clear. "You made an enemy. Watch your back." Tom came over as soon as Luke called, examining the note with a worried frown. "Marlowe. Has to be," Luke agreed. "Sheriff Dawson said she was investigating him. Probably didn't appreciate that." "You should be careful," Tom said. "Marlowe's got a temper and he's not above intimidation. Maybe worse." "I'm not scared of him," Luke said, surprised to find it true. The man who'd hidden from life for 5 years wasn't afraid of some bully with a grudge. Let him come. Gabriel's protected legally and literally. "I'm not giving up what I've built here." But Luke wasn't reckless. He installed security cameras around the property, started varying his daily routine, made sure someone always knew where he was. The old search and rescue training kicked in, assessing threats, planning contingencies, staying alert. Sheriff Dawson increased patrols past the ranch, and Tom started checking in daily rather than weekly. The community formed a protective circle around Luke and his growing sanctuary, as if sensing that what he was building mattered to more than just him. Ellen Crawford called weekly now, and their conversations had shifted from discussions about Gabriel to genuine friendship. She shared stories about Richard, about their life together, about the horses they'd bred and trained. Luke shared stories about Sarah and Emma, finding that he could talk about them now without feeling like he was bleeding out. "You sound happy," Ellen observed during one call. "Actually happy, not just pretending." "I am," Luke said, realizing it was true. "For the first time in 5 years, I'm happy. Scared sometimes, busy always, but happy. Richard used to say that horses have a way of healing the things inside us that we can't heal ourselves," Ellen said. "I think Heaven's Gate, Gabriel. I think he's proven Richard right. He saved my life," Luke said simply. "And I'm going to spend the rest of mine making sure he never regrets it." Late March brought the call Luke had been both anticipating and dreading. Ellen was coming to visit. She'd arranged transportation, booked a hotel in Ironwood, and would arrive in 2 days. Luke threw himself into preparation, cleaning the barn until it gleamed, grooming Gabriel until his coat shone, trimming the ranch until it looked like something more than a recluse's hiding place. Tom helped, understanding without being told that Luke needed everything to be perfect for Ellen's arrival. "She's not here to judge you," Tom said gently, watching Luke scrub the barn floor for the 3rd time. "She's here to see her horse happy and to thank the man who made that possible." "I know," Luke said, but kept scrubbing anyway. Ellen was trusting him with her husband's legacy, with the living memorial to a man she'd loved for 50 years. That deserved more than just adequate care. It deserved excellence. The morning of Ellen's arrival, Luke woke before dawn and went through his preparations one more time. Gabriel seemed to sense something was different, standing alert in his stall, ears pricked forward as if listening for approaching vehicles. "She's coming to see you," Luke told the horse. "Your first mom. The one who loved you when you were young and whole. Before Marlowe, before me. She loved you first, Gabriel. And she still does," Gabriel nickered softly. And Luke could have sworn the horse understood. Tom arrived mid-morning to drive Luke to the hotel, since Luke's hands were shaking too hard to trust himself behind the wheel. Ellen was waiting in the lobby, a small woman with white hair and eyes that still sparkled despite her 81 years. She was using a walker but moved with determination. "Luke," she said, and opened her arms. Luke found himself hugging this woman he'd never met, this stranger who'd become a friend through crisis and kindness. She smelled like lavender and held him with surprising strength. "Thank you," Ellen whispered. "Thank you for saving him. For calling me. For giving an old woman peace. Thank you," Luke replied, "for trusting me. For letting him stay." The drive back to the ranch passed in comfortable conversation. Ellen asked about the expansion, about the other horses, about Luke's plans. She shared more about Richard, about their breeding program, about Heaven's Gate's early years. "He was Richard's masterpiece," Ellen said. "Perfect conformation, brilliant mind, heart bigger than any horse we'd ever bred. Richard said Heaven's Gate would be a champion, and he was. 3 years of competitions, never placing lower than second, and then Richard died, and I couldn't bear to continue showing him. He became my companion instead, my reminder of everything I'd lost." Luke understood that completely, the way objects and creatures could become repositories for grief, symbols of all that had been taken. When they pulled up to the ranch, Gabriel was visible in the paddock, standing tall and alert, coat gleaming in the spring sun. Ellen gasped. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, he's beautiful, just like I remembered, better." They walked slowly to the fence, Ellen's walker navigating the uneven ground with Tom's careful assistance. Gabriel watched their approach, head high, uncertain. Then Ellen spoke. "Heaven's Gate." The horse's entire body changed. His ears shot forward, his neck arched, and he took 3 quick steps toward the fence. Ellen was crying, reaching out with one weathered hand, and Gabriel stretched his neck across the fence to touch her palm with his muzzle. "Hello, my darling," Ellen whispered. "Hello, my beautiful boy. I've missed you so much." Luke stepped back, giving them privacy for their reunion. Tom stood beside him, both men watching as woman and horse reconnected across the space of years and loss and suffering. "He remembers her," Tom said quietly. "Of course he does," Luke replied. "Some bonds don't break no matter how much time passes." April brought Ellen Crawford to Montana on a clear Thursday morning. Luke waited on the porch, nervous in a way he hadn't expected. This woman had trusted him with something precious. He wanted her to be happy with what she found. Tom had offered to pick her up from the airport, and now his truck came up the driveway, moving slowly to avoid the spring mud. Luke walked down to meet them. Ellen was small, white-haired, with kind eyes that held deep sadness but also strength. She moved carefully, leaning on a cane, but her smile was genuine as she shook Luke's hand. "Thank you for having me, and thank you for saving Gabriel. Let me take you to him." They walked to the paddock where Gabriel grazed. The horse's coat gleamed in the spring sunlight, muscles moving smoothly beneath healthy flesh. He looked up at their approach, ears pricked with interest. Ellen stopped, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Oh my God, that's him! That's really him!" Gabriel took a few steps toward the fence, then stopped, uncertain. Ellen moved closer, and Luke saw the moment recognition hit. The horse's entire demeanor changed. His ears shot forward, and he whinnied, high and excited. Then he was trotting to the fence, pushing his head over the rail, reaching for the woman who'd loved him first. Ellen was crying, hands on Gabriel's face, talking to him in a voice thick with emotion. "Hello, baby. Hello, my beautiful boy. I thought you were gone. I thought I'd never see you again." Gabriel leaned into her touch, making soft sounds in his throat. Luke felt his own eyes burn watching them. This was why he'd fought Marlowe, for this moment, for this reunion. He gave them privacy, walking back to the house with Tom. They sat on the porch drinking coffee, letting Ellen have her time with Gabriel. "That's something special," Tom said quietly. "That kind of bond doesn't break, even after years." Luke thought about Sarah, about Emma. His bond with them hadn't broken either. It had transformed, become something he carried inside him instead of something that destroyed him. After an hour, Ellen joined them on the porch. Her eyes were red, but her face was peaceful. "He looks wonderful, healthy and happy. You've done an incredible job. He's a fighter. He wanted to survive. Robert would have loved this, knowing Gabriel was saved by someone who truly cared." She settled into a chair with a grateful sigh. "Tell me about your plans for the sanctuary." They talked for hours. Ellen shared her vision. Luke added his practical knowledge. Tom contributed ideas from decades of ranching. By the time evening arrived, they had the outline of a real plan. Ellen would provide funding for facility construction. Luke would manage operations. Tom would consult on the practical aspects. They'd start small, with capacity for maybe 6 horses, and expand as they established themselves. "We should call it something meaningful," Ellen said. "A name that honors why we're doing this." Luke thought for a moment. Heaven's Gate, Second Chance Sanctuary, honoring Gabriel's original home, but looking forward to new beginnings. Ellen's eyes filled again. Perfect. Robert would have loved that. Over dinner, Ellen told stories about Gabriel's championship days. How he'd won his first major competition at age 5. How Robert had trained him with patience and kindness, never a harsh word or hand. How Gabriel had been Robert's pride and joy. When Robert died, Gabriel grieved too. Horses understand loss. He was depressed for months, and then when he was stolen, Ellen shook her head. "I thought I'd lost both of them forever. But Gabriel survived, and he's here now, bringing something good into the world." Yes, he is." Ellen reached across the table, taking Luke's hand. I know you've suffered loss too. Tom told me a little. I'm sorry for what you've been through." Luke didn't pull away from the sympathy this time. "Gabriel helped me heal, gave me a reason to keep going. Then you saved each other. That's how it should be." Ellen stayed for 3 days, visiting Gabriel daily, helping Luke refine plans for the sanctuary. She met with contractors, approved budgets, made phone calls to veterinarians and suppliers. Her grief hadn't diminished her capability. If anything, it had given her purpose too. On her last evening, she and Luke stood at Gabriel's paddock fence, watching the horse graze in the golden sunset light. "I meant what I said about not being able to care for him," Ellen said. "I'm too old, and he deserves more than I can give. But seeing him here, with you, knowing the work you're going to do, this is right, this is where he belongs. You can visit any time, as often as you want. I'll take you up on that." She smiled. "You know, Robert used to say that horses could see into souls, that they knew who to trust. Gabriel chose you, Luke. He chose to survive because you gave him a reason." Luke watched Gabriel, the horse he'd saved on Christmas Eve, the horse who'd saved him in return. "We all need reasons to keep going. He gave me mine. And now you'll give other horses theirs. Other people too, I suspect. This sanctuary is going to help more than just animals." As Ellen said goodbye the next morning, she hugged Luke tightly. "Thank you for being exactly the person Gabriel needed. The person Robert would have trusted with his boy." After she left, Luke stood in the barn with Gabriel, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility. They were really doing this, building something that mattered, honoring the past while creating a future. Gabriel pushed his nose into Luke's chest and Luke smiled. "Ready for the next chapter, buddy? Because I think it's going to be a good one." May brought Marlowe's trial, and with it, the final confrontation Luke had been preparing for. He dressed carefully that morning, wearing the suit he'd last worn to Sarah and Emma's funeral. It felt strange, constrictive, but appropriate for the courtroom. Tom drove him to the county courthouse, a solid brick building that had stood since the 1920s. Sheriff Dawson met them on the steps, her expression professional but warm. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was smaller than Luke expected, wood-paneled and formal. Marlowe sat at the defense table, wearing an ill-fitting suit, his face hard and defiant. When Luke entered, Marlowe's eyes tracked him with undisguised hatred. Luke took the witness stand after the prosecutor's opening statement. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and settled into the chair. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, smiled encouragingly. "Mr. Thorne, can you tell us about Christmas Eve of last year?" Luke took a breath and began. He described finding Gabriel in the snow, the horse's condition, the immediate danger. He spoke clearly, factually, presenting the events without embellishment. The jury listened intently. Walsh showed photographs. Gabriel on the day Luke found him, emaciated and nearly dead. Gabriel now, healthy and strong. The transformation was stark, undeniable. "In your professional opinion, how long had this horse been starved?" "Weeks at minimum, possibly months. The muscle wasting suggested prolonged malnutrition." "And the scars you documented?" "Consistent with abuse. Whip marks, rope burns, evidence of systematic cruelty." Marlowe's defense attorney, a tired-looking man named Phillips, cross-examined with obvious lack of enthusiasm. "Mr. Thorne, isn't it possible this horse simply wandered away from wherever it was being kept, that the poor condition was due to exposure rather than abuse?" "No. The scars were old, healed. The starvation was ongoing before the horse escaped. And horses don't just wander into remote valleys during blizzards. He was abandoned there." "But you can't prove my client was responsible for any of that, can you?" "I can prove the horse was stolen from Heaven's Gate Ranch in Wyoming. I can prove your client attempted to extort the original owner. I can prove he forged ownership documents, and I can prove he threatened me with a gun when I refused to hand over the horse. All of that is documented, recorded, and witnessed." Phillips had no good response to that. Ellen Crawford testified next, her voice strong despite her age. She spoke about Gabriel's history, about the theft, about Marlowe's extortion attempt. She held the jury's attention completely, a sympathetic figure who'd lost so much and nearly lost more. The veterinarian Tom had brought in on Christmas Day testified about Gabriel's condition, using medical terminology that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Other victims testified about their stolen horses, about Marlowe's pattern of theft and cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the prosecution's case, even Phillips seemed resigned to the outcome. But Marlowe himself chose to testify against his attorney's visible advice. He took the stand with false confidence, and Walsh tore him apart. "Mr. Marlowe, where did you acquire the horse known as Gabriel?" "Bought him at auction." "Legitimate sale?" "Which auction?" "Billings Livestock Exchange. We've subpoenaed their records. No sale of a dark bay gelding matching Gabriel's description in the past 3 years." "Want to try again?" Marlowe's face reddened. "Maybe it was a different auction. Maybe it was stolen from Heaven's Gate Ranch. As documented by the American Quarter Horse Association, I don't know anything about that." Walsh produced the recording from Luke's phone. Marlowe's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. His admission about extorting Ellen, his threats, his bragging about breaking horses. Marlowe's expression shifted from defiance to panic. "That recording is illegal." "You can't use that. Montana is a one-party consent state, Mr. Marlowe. Mr. Thorne was perfectly within his rights to record your threats. And thank goodness he did, because your own words convict you better than any witness could." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "Guilty on all counts: theft, fraud, animal cruelty. Assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted extortion." Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, sentenced Marlowe to 15 years in state prison. "Mr. Marlowe, you have shown a pattern of cruelty and criminal behavior that cannot be tolerated. These animals couldn't defend themselves, but fortunately, people like Mr. Thorne were willing to defend them. You'll have a long time to think about that." As they led Marlowe away, he looked back at Luke with pure hatred. Luke met his gaze steadily. This man had tried to break Gabriel, had tried to intimidate Luke, had failed at both. Outside the courthouse, Ellen hugged Luke tightly. Justice. Finally, justice for Gabriel and all the others. Sheriff Dawson shook his hand. "You did good, Luke, real good." Tom just grinned. "Told you that you still had it. That investigator's instinct." Luke looked up at the clear May sky, feeling lighter than he had in years. One chapter was closed. Another was just beginning. The day after the trial, Luke returned to the ranch, feeling like a weight had been lifted. Gabriel met him at the fence, nickering his usual greeting, and Luke spent an hour just standing with the horse, absorbing the peace of the moment. Construction on the sanctuary had already begun. Tom had organized a crew, and they were building new stalls, a medical facility, proper paddocks. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the valley, but it was a good sound. The sound of creation, of hope. Margaret and her sons visited the following weekend. Luke's nephews, 16 and 18 now, were fascinated by Gabriel and the sanctuary plans. They offered to help with construction, spending their summer volunteering. "You look different, Uncle Luke," the younger one said. "Happier. I am happier. I'm living again instead of just existing." Margaret pulled him aside later. "Sarah would be so proud, Emma too. This is beautiful, what you're building. I wish they could see it. Maybe they can. I'd like to think they're watching, cheering you on." Luke found he could believe that now. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by its weight. The first rescue horse arrived in June. A mare named Willow, seized from a hoarding situation 3 counties over. She was terrified of everything, so thin her hip bones jutted like knives. Sheriff Dawson had asked if Luke's new facility could take her. Luke set her up in a quiet stall, following the same careful protocols he'd developed with Gabriel. Slow feeding, gentle handling, patience. Gabriel watched from his adjacent stall with what Luke swore was understanding. This horse knew what Willow was going through. Within a week, Willow was eating regularly. Within 2 weeks, she'd stopped flinching when Luke approached. Within a month, she was following him around like a puppy, desperate for the affection she'd been denied. Other horses followed. A gelding beaten by a drunk owner, a pony starved and neglected by people who'd lost interest. Each one broken in their own way, each one healing in the sanctuary Luke and Ellen had built. Luke discovered he was good at this work. The patience required, the gentle persistence, the ability to read an animal's needs. It suited him in a way his old rescue work hadn't. These creatures couldn't tell him what they needed, couldn't explain their trauma. He had to observe, interpret, respond. Gabriel became his assistant in a way. The other horses took comfort from his calm presence. He'd survived his trauma and come out the other side. They seemed to recognize that, to take hope from it. Tom was there almost daily, helping with the heavy work, offering advice gained from 7 decades of ranching. He'd taken on a grandfatherly role to Luke, and Luke was grateful for it. One evening in late June, Luke and Tom sat on the porch, watching the horses graze in the long summer light. 6 of them now, counting Gabriel. 6 lives saved, 6 stories of redemption. "You know what you've done here?" Tom said. "You've taken your pain and turned it into something that helps others. That's the definition of healing. I had good teachers. Sarah always helped animals. Emma wanted to. I'm just continuing what they started. You're honoring them. There's no better memorial than that." Luke had started visiting Sarah and Emma's graves regularly, not to grieve, but to talk to them, to tell them about the sanctuary, about Gabriel, about the life he was rebuilding. It felt right, keeping them part of his story instead of trying to move on without them. The wooden horse Emma had loved now sat on a shelf in the barn's main aisle, visible from every stall. Luke had attached a small plaque in memory of Emma Thorne, who dreamed of helping all the horses in the world. He was doing that for her. Every horse saved was in her name. In July, a reporter from the local paper came to do a story on the sanctuary. Luke was reluctant at first, but Ellen convinced him that publicity would help them rescue more animals. The article ran the following week front page, with photographs of Gabriel and the other horses. The headline read, "From dying in the snow to saving others, how one horse changed everything." Donations started arriving. Volunteers offered their time. Other rescue organizations reached out, offering to coordinate on difficult cases. The sanctuary was growing beyond anything Luke had imagined. One particularly special moment came in August, when Gabriel allowed Luke to ride him for the first time. They'd been working up to it for months, rebuilding the trust necessary for the horse to accept weight on his back. When Luke finally settled into the saddle, Gabriel stood perfectly still for a moment, then walked forward with careful, measured steps. They rode around the property slowly, Luke's heart full to bursting. This horse who'd been left to die, who'd been broken and abused, who'd survived against all odds, now carrying Luke with trust and grace. "We made it, buddy," Luke whispered. "We both made it through." Gabriel's ears swiveled back, listening, then forward again, looking toward the future instead of the past. That night, Luke sat at his desk and updated the sanctuary's journal. He documented each horse's progress, each small victory. And at the end, he wrote, "Gabriel taught me that healing is possible, that broken things can be made whole, that love and patience can overcome even the deepest trauma. He saved my life by letting me save his, and now together we're saving others. This is purpose. This is meaning. This is how we honor those we've lost, by helping those who remain." December came around again, bringing with it the memories that would always be bittersweet. But this year, Luke didn't face Christmas Eve alone. The sanctuary now housed 12 horses, each one a story of survival. Volunteers had decorated the barn with simple lights, nothing garish, just warm glows that made the space feel peaceful. Ellen had flown in to spend the holiday, along with Margaret and her boys. Tom, of course, was there with his wife Martha. They gathered in the barn on Christmas Eve, sharing a meal Luke had actually cooked with care. Real food made with thought and love. Gabriel stood in his stall, watching the humans with patient interest. occasionally nickering for attention. "Should we go around and say what we're grateful for?" Margaret suggested. Ellen went first. "I'm grateful for Luke, for saving Gabriel and giving me back a piece of Robert I thought was lost forever. And I'm grateful for this sanctuary, for all the lives it saved and will save." Tom's voice was gruff with emotion. "Grateful to see my friend living again, really living, not just going through motions." Margaret looked at Luke with tears in her eyes. "Grateful my brother-in-law found his way back to us. Sarah and Emma would be so proud." When it was Luke's turn, he stood and walked to Gabriel's stall. The horse pushed his head over the door, and Luke rested his forehead against the soft nose. "1 year ago tonight, I found this horse dying in the snow. I told him nobody should be alone on Christmas. I didn't realize I was really talking to myself." Luke's voice was steady, sure. "Gabriel saved my life by giving me a reason to keep living. He taught me that broken things can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, that love doesn't die just because people do." He turned to face his small gathering of family and friends. "I'm grateful for all of you. For Tom, who refused to let me disappear. For Ellen, who trusted me with something precious. For Margaret, who never gave up on me. For every horse here who reminded me why life matters." Luke looked up at the wooden horse on its shelf, at Emma's drawing pinned beside it. "And I'm grateful for Sarah and Emma. They taught me how to love, how to care, how to see the beauty in broken things. This sanctuary exists because of them. Every horse we save is saved in their memory." After everyone had gone to bed, Luke returned to the barn alone. Gabriel was awake, watching the door as if he'd been waiting. Luke opened the stall and sat in the straw, and the horse lowered his head to rest it on Luke's shoulder. "Merry Christmas, buddy. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for hanging on until I found you." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle. But inside the barn, surrounded by the sounds of horses breathing, Luke felt only warmth. He'd found his way through the darkest valley and emerged on the other side. Not unchanged, never that, but whole in a new way, healed like Gabriel by patience and time and love. The sanctuary was his future now. These horses, this work, this purpose. It was enough. It was everything. It was life, full and real and worth living. And it had all started with a whisper in the snow, a promise made to a dying horse on Christmas Eve. Nobody should be alone. Not horses, not people, not anymore.